We will now begin the session. The aim of this session is to provide valuable perspectives and insights on the topic of economic security in a changing world. While few Japanese media have a bureau in Sydney, the Nikkei opened its bureau in 1969 and covers a wide area of the Oceania region. Recently, two more...
Excuse me to interrupt.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell people to come in because they haven't heard.
It's
No,
okay.
That's okay.
It's online.
Peter would like
It's
to.
online.
It's online. I'm just interrupting now.
Thank you. Recently, two more Nikkei Asia reporters joined the bureau, bringing the total to 4 with the Financial Times. In the Pacific, the United States and fast-growing China are competing for supremacy, and security is a major theme of coverage. Businesses are facing the need to reduce the risk of over-reliance on China in trade and economic activity. Australia has also moved to build supply chains for critical minerals and hydrogen from an economic security perspective. What are the economic security challenges that Australia and Japan need to address? When it comes to managing relationship with China, what are the differences between Australia and Japan? I will be asking journalists on the ground. I would now like to ask each member to introduce themselves and the perspectives they bring to the Japan-Australia economic security relationship. Sean, could you start?
Certainly. Hello, everybody who's not having lunch. My name's Sean Turton. I recently started at Nikkei Asia at the start of this year. I was previously writing for Nikkei from Southeast Asia, and I've spent some time in other countries before that. Started in Melbourne a number of years ago. So the thing that we're sort of really interested in at Nikkei is about sort of how Australia fits into global supply chains, and that's an issue that's more and more being sort of intertwined with geopolitics. So geopolitics is another. There's my phone. There's another issue that we're interested in, and it's been a fantastic opportunity to get a job with Nikkei. It's a very unique publication. We have people in every country in Asia, which I think sort of sets us apart from other outlets. We can have people go to press conferences in the Philippines at the same time as we knock on doors in Vietnam. So it's good to try to bring more of an Australian sort of perspective to the Nikkei Asia coverage. So.
Thank you and welcome to the Nikkei Asia.
Yeah.
And Sophie, could you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Sophie. I'm a research assistant at Nikkei Asia Sydney's bureau, and I am born and raised in Hong Kong. I came to Australia in 2020 and finished my master's degree, and then this is my first job in Australia. And at Nikkei, I'm mostly helping Rory and Sean do their research, but I also am able to do a lot of do a lot of reporting on topics that I'm interested in, like security and foreign policies of Australia and Pacific Islands, and especially when China is increasing its influence in the region, and I like to see what challenges and opportunities Pacific Islands are facing. And with Nikkei, we have the advantage of having access to Pacific leaders. We are able to travel around the world. Just this year, the team traveled to Tokyo, Tonga, and Fiji, and had interactions with Pacific leaders. And so I'd like to use this opportunity to share with you their thoughts on economic security. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. We will later hear from you about your perspectives on the Pacific as well. So now RURIKA is Sydney bureau chief. So RURIKA, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is RURIKA IMAHASHI, and I'm current Sydney bureau chief for Nikkei. And I came to Australia 1 year and a half last year in April, and started my tenure in Sydney. Before that, I was based in Tokyo all the time, covering commodities and Japanese companies, and also first ever postponed Olympic Games in COVID times. In modern era. So I covered a wide range of topics, but this is my first overseas post. So I really surprised, and I was really glad when I know that I was coming to Australia.
Great. And some people ask us that if Sydney Bureau is a female bureau, because after me, I was succeeded by Matsumoto Fumi-san, who was with her children as well, and then RURIKA. But actually, we are lucky to have this Sydney Bureau, which has a wide coverage and lots of things to report. Now, I'd like to ask the question to each of you. So, transition to a decarbonized society and critical minerals is not only about economy, because it's economic security. Can Australia and Japan continue to build complementary relationships in hydrogen and critical minerals as we have done so in iron ore and coal and LNG and other business from the economic perspective? So let's talk about the challenges of economic security matters. Do you think it works?
I mean, huge question marks over, how... I mean, Australia has huge hopes and ambitions for critical minerals. They've made a central platform of their Future Made in Australia policy, and they're proposing tax production credits and trying to transition the economy towards these minerals that go into energy transition supply chains, things like batteries and clean technology. But it's a really difficult prospect because the prices are so volatile. So at the moment you have oversupply in lithium and nickel and cobalt, and so the incentive to get to invest, the financing is very, very difficult. So, I mean, that's coupled also with this plank of resilience and trying to set up alternative supply chains from China, when China sort of completely dominates the critical mineral processing. So that's sort of a bit of a ramble to say that Japan's role and Korea's role and the US role is really going to be important if these alternative supply chains can actually be developed and sustained. But I mean, it's going to take a lot of investment and long-term subsidies, and these are subsidies that competing against a country like China, where they've spent decades building, sort of capacity and dominance in things like, lithium processing and rare earths. So, huge challenge.
Australia would like to attract production and manufacturing processes in the global supply chain, as I understand it. But Australia's manufacturing industry is not well developed, and there have been no finished vehicle manufacturers in the country since Toyota Motor Corporation left production in 2017. One of the reasons Toyota left was that the government of the day had given up on subsidizing an uncompetitive car industry. Can the public understand subsidies for hydrogen and other products, RURIKA?
So I would like to talk about hydrogen. But before talking about that, we know that Japan, Australia has a long-standing relationship in the past, like building supply chain of iron ore and energy, and behind the current initiative of hydrogen, I think we have a mentality of teaming up together and making a difficult project possible together. So hydrogen, Japan was the first country that formulated a national hydrogen strategy back in 2017, and Australia followed in 2019 to formulate a national strategy regarding hydrogen. And but we do face challenges, especially on how we can bring down the production cost, because currently it is said that 70% of the hydrogen production cost comes from electricity, and renewable and electricity prices are still remain high. So we need to collaborate more and think about how we can bring down this cost further. And I've heard from industry people, participants, that subsidies are not enough. So although we have some subsidies or initiatives, programs to political support, we may see how things develops in hydrogen field and what kind of additional policy support we can see in this area.
Yeah, so we have to look at this issue in a very broad perspective. So speaking about the Pacific, we are talking about this because of the rivalry between the United States and China in the Pacifics. So tell us more about, Sophie, with your expertise, the struggle for the hegemony in the region.
I think it's firstly important to talk about the aid landscape in the Pacific. Australia is currently the largest development the largest development partner in the Pacific, accounting for 40% of its ODF, followed in a distance by Asian Development Bank, China, New Zealand, Japan. China's ODF has peaked in 2016 and then has been in decline ever since, but it doesn't mean that their influence has waned. In fact, if you've read any of our reports in the last 5 years, it would have been the opposite. One strategy they've been employing is something called elite capture, which is a politically targeted approach to aid, which targets elites in the Pacific, including government leaders and also people in positions of power. And if you look at one of the biggest example of Chinese aid in the Pacific, it would be the huge 12,000 seat stadium in the Solomon Islands, which China funded. $74 million it cost China, and it raised a lot of attention, but it didn't really have much developmental impacts on local people on the ground. What it really benefited was then Prime Minister of the Solomon Islands, Salgavare's political legacy. It cemented his political legacy because of his ability to put Solomon Islands on the map under the international spotlight. And the same for Kiribati as well. We talked with the former president of Kiribati, Anote Tong, last week, and he said China is very forthcoming with its aid in the Pacific, in Kiribati, and it's always interested in developing more large-scale infrastructure projects, including this upgrade of an airport runway, an entertainment park. But his comments were, they have short-term visible results. They're large scale. They attract a lot of attention, but it has little developmental impacts on the ground. What people in Kiribati most need right now is water and sanitation, education, climate change adaptation, and China is not really helping in that regard by focusing on low-risk, large-scale infrastructure projects. But how China benefits in this regard is its loyalty from Pacific leaders who benefit politically from these projects, and also their unwavering loyalty when it comes to supporting Beijing's political agenda, which is the One China policy, and further alienating Taiwan on the international stage. So we can see China using its economic clout in financially rewarding Pacific leaders who are abiding by its own sort of political agenda. At the same time, we also see it using this carrot and stick approach in countries who are not following its rules. In Palau, for example, Palau is one of 3 countries in the Pacific who are still maintaining diplomatic ties with Taiwan. And in Palau, China is dangling this carrot and also brandishing its stick if we're still using this carrot and stick analogy, to sort of force Palau into cutting ties with Taiwan. Beijing has been providing economic incentives to Palau, promising millions of Chinese tourists, to promise that Chinese tourists would fill up every hotel room, build more hotel rooms to accommodate these Chinese tourists. And when Palau is still sort of being steadfast in maintaining ties with Taiwan, which is still sort of the case until the next election. Palau, so it's brandishing a stick in front of Palau, basically punishing it for not abiding by its rules and not switching sides. And this sort of and this has been done in various ways. China has stopped its state-run travel agents, from sending tourist groups to Palau, which led to a 22% drop in Chinese tourists in 2017, and also leading to a 30% drop in Palau's economy, which is very dependent on the tourism industry. And also it has most recently, we talked to Palau President Serangel Whips, and he said the country has suffered from a ransomware attack on its customs and border systems, which they believed came from China, intended to disrupt tourism arrivals. So we've seen China using economic coercion to punish countries who are not following its rules, not following its agenda.
Sean, I heard that you just witnessed this a little bit of drama in the Pacific just recently. Tell us more.
Oh yeah, to add to that, so we went to the Pacific Island Forum. I think the week before last in Tonga, and so as Sophie was explaining, there's this sort of ongoing competition. I think Penny Wong calls it a permanent competition in the Pacific for influence, and the question that sort of hung over the meeting was whether Taiwan would continue to be a continuous relationship with the Pacific Island Forum. So it's been known as a development partner for 30 years. It sort of allows it to have a sort of formal relationship with that organization. And so China is quite close to the Solomon Islands. Solomon Islands was seen as a proxy to push Taiwan out of that arrangement. And so at the end of the meeting, the final joint communique came out, and it had a line there sort of reasserting the ongoing ties with Taiwan under that arrangement as a development partner. So Ruri and I were at the press conference, and we sort of witnessed the Chinese ambassador Pacific, Qianbao, get visibly angry immediately when he read that line, and went straight up to the Pacific Island Forum, the Secretary General, and said it was unacceptable, like in the room, which is not, probably the best place to do diplomacy in front of a bunch of journalists. But and then we managed to interview him for a couple of minutes outside, and calling it a mistake, calling it unacceptable, and then hours later the communique disappears, it reappears the next day without that line. So exactly what the sequence was to that being included and that being is not entirely true, but the impression is pretty clear, right? So that was the recent experience.
And that vivid Nikkei Asia report was quoted by other global media, I understand, and that's really what we are here for. And so what is the Australian government's China policy since the change to a Labour government? RURIKA or Sophie, would you like to comment?
In regards to the Pacific, aid delivery has been always seen as an apolitical act, but now Albanese government has sort of changed this worldview. It's no longer complacent or naive in this regard. It has seen realized that China is using aid as a political goal that might change governance institutions and even democratic norms. So it has been putting more focus on the Pacific, but expending more aid doesn't really change much. It has to be more targeted. Last year, the Albanese government spent $10 million on this Pacific game stadium in Solomon Islands that we talked about earlier, and that's 10% of its official sort of aid towards the Solomon Islands that year, and it's sort of been seen as something that is that is politically targeted just to counter the Chinese aid in that regard, and that's seen as disingenuous. So sort of the Albanese government needs to focus more on that and sort of work on policies, aid delivery that is seen as more genuine and then helpful towards the Pacific.
Right, thank you. And RURIKA, you talked about hydrogen and the supply chain in Australia. Will Australia be able to reduce its dependence on China?
Yeah, it just depends on what kind of. As for trade, I think Australia continues to be a major and important energy supplier to any country, including Japan. And stabilization of the relationship for Australia is very important. And this is also true for Japan, and China is also a very important trade partner for Japan as well. So I think how far we can reduce dependency on China for example, critical mineral processing is as SHAUN said, we still have challenges. That's why it is more important for us, Japan, Australia, work together. And I think a good example on this context is Australian company Linus. Japan in 2010, China restricted rare earth exports to Japan, and Japan looked to Linus, Australian supplier, for its rare earth supply to the country, and has been very financially supported the company. So it's kind of a good example of us being together, working together towards shared goal. And I think we continue to see that kind of collaboration in that direction.
That's a great point. And SHAUN, what do you think about our relationship with China? As RURIKA just pointed out, it's our largest trading partner for countries like Japan and Australia, and we are not like a big major powers like the U.S. So it seems that we have a limited measures to counteract sort of the big powers such as China and the U.S. And how can we collaborate to confront this situation?
If I knew the answer perfectly, I think I'd be much, much better paid. But no, Nikkei pays me well. But these are big. My point is, these are really big questions, and these are things that we try to report on incrementally and follow every day. I mean, you can't talk about not relying on China. It's such a huge part of all trade, of all manufacturing. It can't be separated. So I suppose what you're talking about is whether or not you can have alternative supply chains that can be sustainable, and it's a huge question, because setting up new industry or new processing is just inherently more expensive, and particularly in a place like Australia. So that's why it's important, if this is the strategy of places like Australia, Japan, and the US to do, then they have to all chip in and do it and be able to sustain it for a long time. So yeah, you're never going to compete with China on cost, because they've been developing economies of scale for decades. But if it is the goal to have segments of the supply chain that don't run through China, then it's viable, but it's just very expensive. And whether or not, places like Australia and the US that, have political cycles and, cost of living pressures, so subsidies are always going to be an electoral issue as well. So, yeah, that's one of the big questions. It can be done, but whether it can be, sustained to the point where it becomes viable. And also all of the critical minerals, they're all quite massive. They're all quite small industries, so they can flip between, undersupply and oversupply quite quickly. So, yeah, I'm not sure what my final point was, but a lot of challenges. And
for doing your best with your salary that you receive.
Salary is quite good. I'm not asking for any more, Nikkei. Thanks.
And I'd like to a little bit ask this last question before I open this floor to for the question and answers. Just the current Australian government's attitude towards China under the Labour government, with you've experienced a lot of economic cohesion from the Chinese government, including the trading tariffs and so on. And how is it managing the relationship now with China?
Me? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, Ruri said before the word was stabilization. I think the government keeps on going on about, agree where we can, disagree where we must, or, sort of platitudes like that. It's a fine line, because China has, demonstrated that it will use trade, punitively when it perceives, a reason to do so. So, yeah, they're trying to sort of, again, it's a bit of a cliche, but the balancing act between continuing this important economic relationship and not ceding ground on issues that they see as important. So, yeah.
And with the U.S. election coming, and how could we establish the new relationship with the new president in the U.S.? Rurika, do you have any? It's a big question, just from our perspective.
I do believe Australian government, the Japanese government as well, already have some established relationship experience with dealing with Mr. Trump, and if Kamala Harris also. Basically, it's the same. Till the importance in the Indo-Pacific region is continues to be present. So whichever candidate will be the next president, we will continue to see the trilateral relationship being stronger in the Indo-Pacific region. And last week I joined 2+2 meeting in Melbourne, and I remember a Japanese minister reiterating that Australia is the second. The security ties with Australia is the second only to the United States, which is Japan's only ally. And I think Japan's view on Australia is really has momentum, and we are a partner already, and that kind of strong relationship, I think, will continue to be.
Thank you, Rurika. Now, any questions from the floor? Anyone with any questions? Please raise your hand. Mimi, please. So the mic is coming.
Thank you very much. I've always been very impressed with the quality of journalists from Nikkei, and I'm sure the salary is also very impressive too. I was speaking at the Asia Summit last week, hosted by the Financial Review, sandwiched between a pro-China speaker and a pro-Japan and US and everyone else speaker. We couldn't avoid China being just the biggest topic at that summit, and to the point where the audience was asking, can we stop talking less about China? And so I wonder, in the context of this forum, I would be curious from our three esteemed journalists here, what you also think about Japan's role in the wider region in APAC, and our engagement with Indonesia, which was what Senator Penny Wong was emphasizing in her keynote at the Asia Summit. So how is Japan engaging with Indonesia and other countries in our immediate region?
Thank you very much for the question. I regret saying that thing before, but so I guess I take this from my experience in Southeast Asia beforehand. So I was in Cambodia and covering the region for quite some time. Japan's been a huge supplier of aid and investment in Southeast Asia for decades. I mean, it's only been in places like Cambodia that the last 10 years that China has eclipsed the Japan investment. And I think, like some panelists have said before about the business environment, like a lot of it was quite quiet, like quite low profile, things like, sewage systems and roads. So Japan's got such a long track record of supplying, aid and concessional sort of investments in the region that, there's a huge opportunity for Australia to be a part a part of that type of program. Like it's definitely something Japan has turned slightly towards the security angle as well in the Pacific. They've launched the OSA, the official security assistance, which has seen them contribute vessels to the Fiji Navy. So I think as the Australian-Japan relationship grows, there are more opportunities to partner. I mean, Penny Wong just announced, I think last week or earlier at the 2+2, that they're going to partner on digital connectivity in the region. I mean, it's sort of putting a brand on things they've already been doing. They've been doing, subsea cables, and so it looks like that's the direction things are really going to go in. And there'll be more in that space.
Anyone would like to add your comments on? Or so yes, please, both sides, please make a question.
Sorry, thank you. I share Mimi's comments about the quality of journalism from the Nikkei. My question is that Prime Minister Kishida has worked very hard to re-establish or improve relationships with South Korea. Is that going to continue with the change of leadership in Japan?
RURIKA, please.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for the question. Yeah. So it's, I think, under the new government of South Korea, we see momentum building between Seoul and Tokyo as well. And we don't know yet who is going to be the next leader of LDP. Yeah, but quite based the candidates they are in common that they value ties with ally, which is United States, and we do see a lot of multilateral partnerships, like whether it's Quad or whether it's the new Quad with the Philippines, and also South Korea, Japan, U.S. This triangle relationships grew, and I think we continue to see that kind of trend and multilateralism. So I don't think any big change will occur in the relationship with South Korea.
Any comments from the floor? If not, that's the end of the session. It's short, but please, if you have a chance, take a copy of Nikkei Asia, which is in print, mostly the last print. We are transforming into the digital platform completely. So, and thank you so much for joining us. And this concludes the Nikkei Forum Sydney 2024 and its live broadcast. We will now display a request for feedback via survey and provide information about the archive broadcast. We would greatly appreciate for your help. And thank you to our colleagues and panelists. And thank you to all the audience in person and online. Thank you so much.